All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, so glad to be talking to you today. And yeah, that's the newest version I've got of a very old piece of music for Elise. Not even as old as some, but I guess Beethoven probably wrote that, I don't know, 1810, 1812, something like that. I don't know when he wrote it, but over 200 years ago. Pretty amazing, and it sounds as good today as ever. But that's a public domain version, and I played a couple of different versions of it and periodically got notified by Facebook, not so much YouTube, that I was violating any rules or anything, but that the music itself was copyrighted, and if I generated any revenues from the videos, then I would have to share them, or Facebook would simply share the revenues with the artist, not Beethoven, obviously, but the pianist or whoever had the rights to the particular performance I was playing. So I just wanted to avoid any headaches. I certainly don't mind sharing any revenues if there were any, which I don't think there are. I'm not aware of any, but I certainly don't mind sharing those. But what I'd prefer is just not have any issues with copyright. So I scoured the web to find a completely copyright-free public domain version. And I think the one I'm playing now, I haven't had any notifications that there's a problem. And the website from which I downloaded it said, this is public domain. You can use it for any purpose you want without any attribution or anything else. So that's the hope. There shouldn't be any more issues. And if there are, well, then you might hear yet another version of that very, very well-known piece of music by Beethoven for Elise. All right, that means, of course, for Elise, right? For in German being for. Phone number here, 240-242-5646 for Halitics. Hope you'll join me. Please do click subscribe and click notify as well, so you know when I go live. Also, we do have our Facebook GIF. I spent a lot of time working on that Facebook GIF, so, well, maybe about a half hour. I know it took a little bit of time because I wanted to make sure I knew how to do it correctly. So want more? Now I've got them playing over each other, the subscribe and the GIF. Yeah, want more Halitics? Join Halitics on Facebook. That's what we want you to do. So I'll get into the topics. It is a free-for-all, though, so that means even more than usual. I hope you'll join me by calling in, and you can see again the number there is right on the screen. Yesterday, I told you that I was down on Capitol Hill talking to the staff. Unfortunately, it's very hard to reach representatives. Every now and then we do find one that'll talk to us or who is available you run into and you can speak to for a few moments. But it is rare. Usually we just talk to the reception person, whoever is receiving visitors. Every now and then we get a staffer who is assigned to a particular topic. So when we're talking about Gaza, we're talking about Israel, usually the staffer would be the one assigned to foreign policy, military, sometimes it depends. And one thing we learned, you might be interested to know, I sure didn't, that the Pentagon actually dispatches Army and other service members, troops, to serve in the representatives' offices. So they have an army, usually it's a soldier, who's a full service on duty, right? Full service soldier who is serving, who's embedded in each representative's offices, or at least each representative who's on the Armed Services Committee and who's on other committees that the military deems of great importance to them. And that's a problem because obviously they are going to be presenting a very specific viewpoint, the view that the generals want, that the military leaders want Congress to hear. And they're getting paid to, that's their job. Their job is to be whispering in the ear of representatives the military perspective on various issues. And I don't think that's right. I I think that explains to a degree, a relatively small degree, but it explains to a degree why we are such a bellicose nation, why we are so invested in military spending, in permanent warfare. It's very, very troubling. And, think about how that works. So if you're a representative on the Armed Services Committee and you're skeptical, we played the clip yesterday of Cori Bush saying that when bills came before Congress to fund the endless proxy war with Russia, those representatives who might have been skeptical of those bills and said, hey, we shouldn't be spending all that money, all those millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into the billions of dollars. We shouldn't be spending all that money on a war on the other side of the planet that doesn't do any good for my constituents, that is actually taking needed resources away from them. And if you have a representative who might be inclined to that viewpoint, then they were told by Blinken, by the Biden-Harris administration, well, you prefer that we spend the money, the taxpayer money, than send your constituents into battle, wouldn't you? Because those are the choices we're giving you. Your choice is either spend hundreds of millions of dollars, which could be used to improve the quality of life of your constituents, or we'll send some of those constituents into battle. Those are your choices. That's what the State Department told Cori Bush, according to Cori Bush. So if you think about having an embedded military, a soldier, a lieutenant, a captain, whatever they are, I presume they're officers. Maybe there's some enlisted personnel as well who are dispatched to work in these offices. They go back. They're listening. They're a fly on the wall in these congressional offices. They're hearing the concerns that the representatives are having. They go back to the captain, the colonel, whoever they report to, and they say, well, Bush is a little bit iffy. We can't really count on her vote. How do we get around her? How do we get past her? That kind of thing. It's a real, it's one more example of how we don't live in a democracy, how there are certain people, certain groups, certain institutions that wield extraordinary power in our government over policy, and others who have virtually no power at all. I mentioned yesterday that what we were lobbying for was a letter to Trump saying, let independent media cover Gaza. Let journalists who have no connection to Israel, who are not Hasbara purveyors, propagandists, let them into Gaza. That's what we want the position to be of the U.S. government right now. And we have yet to identify someone who will actually be the lead on that letter. But I saw this in my Google group, and I think it was WhatsApp, that's right, because we have all these different ways of communicating, Signal, Google groups. I like Google groups, actually. I think they're pretty good. There's Slack, right? So you have different, you have a different group of folks who are working together. How do we all email each other? We know email is so unwieldy. It's hard to just, pile on to one particular comment and just follow up on it. So we use various apps, and this one this was WhatsApp, for whatever that's worth. And the link was to this tweet from Representative Delia Ramirez, Illinois. I didn't even realize where she was from. I don't know. I thought either Florida or California, but no, it's Illinois. So Delia, that's her name, Delia Ramirez. She says exactly what we want. Peace is delicate. Yes, and we're saying that the ceasefire in Gaza, very fragile is the word we use. Peace is delicate. In this moment of transition, we all need international journalists to keep us informed about what's happening in Palestine and Israel. We must continue to demand press access and ensure the safety of journalists in Gaza and the West Bank. So kudos to Democratic Representative Delia Ramirez. I'm very critical of Democrats, as you know, in this program, but hats off to this particular Democrat for making this particular statement at the most opportune time. And she does link to a tweet from UNRWA, the United Nations refugee. I don't know what that W stands for. I have trouble with it. But their group is there to help the victims of war, right? The victims of warfare. And they are the ones who have kept Israel to the best they possibly can, somewhat honest. And Israel's, made war on UNRWA and said that they're an arm of Hamas, which is completely false. No evidence to support that whatsoever. Complete BS. They've done everything they can to discredit UNRWA, to have UNRWA defunded. By the way, Blinken, Harris defunded UNRWA, as far as I understand. Certainly Trump will continue that. And to Ramirez's credit, despite the criticism that UNRWA receives in this country, the unfair criticism, she cites them for the proposition that Israel continues to ban international media from Gaza, and they say how bad that is. Of course it is. All right, if you want to join me again, 240-242-5646. We're going to focus on Trump, some of the ways he may be failing, and especially when it comes to working class voters who did support him. And we'll get into that in a moment. One of the areas where I thought Trump, and I mentioned this yesterday, was a little less bad than Democrats was Ukraine. And I think he continues to demonstrate that he is less bad than Democrats. He did speak about Ukraine yesterday at Davos. So let's, World Economic Forum there, all those billionaires. So here's Trump at Davos on Ukraine. And this is a long clip. This is about 4 or 5 minutes. It's from, DW, that's Deutsche Welt, I guess, German World. So this is the German media on covering this story.
We begin the day with Donald Trump's push for a deal to end the war in Ukraine. In the first major international speech of his second presidency, Trump told political and business leaders at the World Economic Forum taking place in Davos, Switzerland, that he's working to end the conflict, but offered few details on how he plans to do it. Let's take a listen.
One thing very important, I really would like to be able to meet with President Putin soon and get that war ended. And that's not from the standpoint of economy or anything else. It's from the standpoint of millions of lives are being wasted. I've seen pictures of what's taken place. It's a carnage, and we really have to stop that war. That war is horrible. And I'm
going to stop it right there for just a moment. So again, I give Trump credit for that. I mean, he does show some humanity, right? He's saying, hey, I saw the picture. This is what he said about Gaza too, where he said it's really awful, or we've seen pictures, it looks like a construction site. And again, I thought there was a tiny glimmer of humanity when Trump said that. I didn't really remember, and I could be wrong. I remember Harris saying, oh, the war has to end. It's terrible what we've seen. I never really believed she cared. I'm not saying she doesn't, but I didn't really feel there was much sincerity. And not that there's a lot from Trump, but I felt like there was a little bit of lamentation. There was a sense from Trump that he had some recognition of the human cost of the loss, and that it did inform his policies to a degree. I think here it's clear. Yes, he is saying this has to end because of the terrible carnage. He's making it clear. That's why. It's not a question about geopolitics. It's not a question of, resource allocation or who's going to control what particular area. It's just we have to stop it because there's too much pain that's being inflicted. So I give Trump credit for that. He also says, I want to talk to Putin. It's interesting because I did a little research beyond this clip, and I had taken the position that if you had a U.S. president committed to peace between Russia and Ukraine and between Russia and the United States, that we would get there. And I viewed Trump as a more likely peace advocate. What he's saying here does not change that opinion. I do believe Trump is a more likely peace advocate, but I'm somewhat a little bit more skeptical because, for example, he hasn't had any meetings with Putin. He wants to. He's met with Zelensky, not Putin. That said, as far as I can tell, Putin is the stumbling block. And I make that statement fully mindful that I've argued in the past that that Putin wants peace, that Putin isn't a monster, that, he's not great. We don't like Putin, of course, but there are lots of bad leaders in this world, including in this country, including our leader now, including our previous leaders, Harris, Biden. There are lots of bad leaders. And yeah, Putin's one of them, but he's not irrational, and he realizes how harmful, how bad the war has been for Russia, so he would, be there to meet with Trump. As far as I can tell, he's been a little slow about that. He hasn't chomped at the bit to try to have peace right now. And that's very, very unfortunate. I don't think that means we stop pushing. I don't think that means we throw up our hands and say, fine, here's a blank check, Ukraine, just go to work. I think part of the reason we're having this problem now is because Biden gave a lot of material, a lot of weaponry to Ukraine just before leaving office, which was a mistake, I believe, although consistent with his championing the military-industrial complex. Anthony Blinken, who works for contractors or worked for contractors, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, whose clients included defense contractors. So I think that's consistent with what Biden did. Maybe the harm that Ukraine is imposing on Russia is causing Putin to get his back up. Maybe it feels like Trump's been giving him too much pressure. Whatever it is, Putin should be right now, in talks. He should be welcoming those. And it's very unfortunate that he isn't. All that said, and it does, I think, support the claims of those who have argued with me that Ukraine had no choice. It's all on Putin. It's this, is that. I'm not convinced of that. There were opportunities to get peace, and they were forsaken, they were ignored, they were avoided. But right now, yeah, Putin, I would certainly hope that you would listen to Trump and you would sit down and talk with him and Zelensky. All right, more from Trump.
I'm talking economy. I'm not talking economics. I'm not talking about natural resource. I'm just talking about there's so many young people being killed in this war. Hopefully China can help us stop the war with, in particular, Russia, Ukraine. They have a great deal of power over that situation.
President, when you're,
I want to stop it there again. I thought what Trump said there was really good. He said, hey, we got to get China involved. They've got a lot of influence over Russia, which is true. So he's clearly, trying to push for peace. And that's a really good thing. Let's hear more from this Davos conference, because I find it very, very interesting. By the way, see a phone call I got yesterday after the program was over. So if you called me yesterday, remember, I'm only on live. I'm only able to answer calls when I'm live. Obviously, if I'm not live, I'm doing something else. But usually live noon to 1. Yesterday was a special exception. Call me 240-242-5646. And I don't know why it doesn't say live as I look. By the way, hey, Ari, good to see your watermelon flags there. That's what they call the Palestinians, right? The watermelon flag, because it's black, green, and red. So the red is like the watermelon's meat, the green is the rind, and the black is the seed. So huge props to you for doing that. And yeah, give me a call if you got a chance. All right, let's go back. The Davos conference, very interesting.
So next year, will there be then a peace agreement with Ukraine and Russia by then?
Well, you're going to have to ask Russia. Ukraine is ready to make a deal.
All right, so when he said that, I'm like, are they really ready? And we'll play. This is going to be more, you'll hear a Ukrainian speak. But again, this is that kind of rhetoric. Well, Israel's ready to have peace with Hamas anytime. It's Hamas that's in the stumbling block. We know that was a lie. That was complete hasbara in the mouths of American leaders. Blinken, Biden, Harris. In this case, seems like Trump's got a point. Russia does appear to be the stumbling block.
So you understand, this is a war that should have never started. If I were president, it would never have started.
All right, so this is the bombast, the narcissism. Oh, if I was there. Again, just put a lid on that nonsense. Just say, hey, this is where we are now. It's not a good situation. We're doing the best to end it. I do think the war probably didn't need to start, but the better argument Trump could make is it could have been ended very quickly, and instead it was promoted. War with Russia was promoted by the Harris-Biden administration. And that's the case. That is true.
And joining me now from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, is Kira Rudik, a member of the Ukrainian parliament and leader of the opposition Golos party. A very warm welcome to DW.
All right, so we'll hear from this Ukrainian politician in a moment, but I wanted to just point out, when I saw Deutsche Welle, DW, you can see it up there, go to leave Davos and go to Ukraine, I thought, we're going to hear more propaganda. We're going to hear Ukrainian propaganda. But what made this very intriguing to me is that the woman in the turtleneck there, who's the politician, is introduced as an opposition leader. So she's not part of the Zelensky party. And I think that means maybe she's a little more credible. Plus, what she had to say, I didn't find, it seemed plausible, seemed legit, seemed reasonable. So let's play it. Now, of course, she's got a pro-Ukraine slant, but, you filter everything through that. But still, what she has to say here is really worth listening to, especially because we are seeing this terrible war drag on, even now Trump in office and reaching out, making overtures to Putin, and we're not getting that positive response we were hoping for. I think many of us, I certainly was, from Putin to end the war, and that Trump was hoping for, as he said, he just wants this stuff, the killing, to end.
The U.S. president said today that Ukraine is ready to do a deal. How open are you to a peace agreement with Russia, and on what terms?
Hello, Claire, and thank you so much for having me. Well, we did not start this war, and we always said that there is a very simple and quick way to end the war if Russia pulls back their troops and stop the war of aggression. However, we were talking, and our president made this statement.
So let me stop it. That's, not likely to happen. But the way you might get to that, or something similar, something acceptable, a demilitarized zone, I think is far more likely than Russia pulling out of Donbass. Because Donbass is a predominantly Russian-speaking area, they're not going to give up Crimea, which they've occupied since 2014. So if you're putting Crimea on the table, that's not likely to happen. But again, talks are essential, and there haven't been talks. Blinken always put all these absurd conditions on talks. She's not putting the conditions. Blinken said, hey, the only way we're going to have talks with Russia is when Russia pulls out. Well, she's saying pulling out is the way you get peace. That's a lot better than for Blinken to say, well, first you pull out, then we'll talk to you. No, she's saying, hey, let's get peace together. Let's figure it out when Russia withdraws. If Russia withdraws, that's the end of it. I thought that was a little bit more useful. Again, if you're wondering what the distinction is Blinken's not saying a Russia pullout ends the war. It's the predicate for negotiating. She's saying, no, a Russian pullout would end the war. That's not going to happen, but at least, there's discussion to be had. And she does make it clear, this woman, Kira Rudik, the Ukrainian parliamentarian, or member of parliament, I shouldn't say parliamentarian, that's a particular office, but the member of parliament here makes clear what what Ukraine really wants.
Ukraine may be discussing peace solutions if there are really good security guarantees. Because right now, Ukraine is in the situation where we have already been in agreement with Russia since 2014 about the peace on our territories.
So there's a little bit of disingenuousness there. At least Russia would argue, no, you really didn't. You really weren't a good neighbor to us. You were fomenting rebellions in Donbass. You were, you were really pushing for any kind of, guerrilla warfare against Russia. You were treating Russians very badly, Russian speakers in Donbass. You have paramilitary organizations that, are neo-Nazi descendant groups. So you really weren't so great for us as neighbors, and you kept talking about joining NATO. So that would be Russia's response. Now, I'm just making the point that both sides are going to have their grievances. I think most viewers, most Americans are far more likely to side with Ukraine. Okay, but the bottom line is what Kira Rudik said there is, what we want is security guarantees. And I think that's totally legitimate, of course. So how do you get there? You talk, you negotiate, and she's not ruling that out.
There it got us that in 2022, Russia started the war of aggression. So if right now we are talking about any kind of discussion, any kind of the deal, the main question is who or what will make sure that Russia will keep their part of the bargain. We still did not hear from Donald Trump or anyone else in the world that they will make sure that Russia will keep their part of the deal.
Well, that was going to be my very question, whether you think Donald Trump is the man who could provide those securities. He himself has great confidence in his ability to do a deal, having famously said before being elected that he could end the fighting in Ukraine in a day. So that has not happened. Do you have faith that in the weeks to come, the U.S. can deliver peace for your country?
Well, Claire, I would say we are moderately optimistic. Of course, we were worried when there were claims that the war can be ended in one day. We know that there are no simple solutions.
So let me stop it there. So there's the headline that says Kremlin ready for Ukraine talks with U.S. That's to crawl there. They don't they don't explicate that. And I don't know whether that crawl came after they had recorded the video and the statement came from the Russia, from Moscow. Yes, we'll talk. So hopefully, that's really good news. I'd also say one other thing where she said we're moderately optimistic, right? She said that they want those security guarantees. You got to go to the UN. And this, I hope Trump gets. I hope he understands. And Elise Stefanik is about the last person you want to be trying to negotiate delicately a dance between these two adversaries, Ukraine and Russia. She's the last person you'd want, except for maybe John Bolton, Trump's first choice for UN ambassador. But nevertheless, Trump gets some credit, just like he did. Now, maybe I would have liked more. I would like to see peace right now, but he does seem to really be pushing for this. And we are now seeing a real shift in tone, right? A real shift in tone now where Ukraine and Russia are both being pressured, pushed, to come to the table to negotiate and to enter into peace talks and enter into a ceasefire and peace. And that is so much better than what we had before under Harris Biden. And there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Very fragile, could break down. I don't trust the Trump administration in any way to hold Israel account, which is essential. But again, maybe there's a little bit of light at the end of that tunnel. And you even heard it from Kira Rudik, the member of parliament there from Moscow, saying, yeah, we're cautiously optimistic. Okay, this program, what I kind of billboarded it as, was how to defeat Maga, right? How progressives. It's not really about Democrats. It's about how progressives have an opportunity to defeat Maga. And I've taken the position, as I took the position 8 years ago after Trump was elected, and I wrote about this, that the way you defeat MAGA is that you point out areas where Trump is not helping his constituents, where Trump is betraying his voters, where Trump is not doing what his working class supporters want. But that's not enough. That's important. But you also have to provide a credible alternative that will be better, clearly better. This is where Democrats completely fell down. They have not provided that credible alternative. Bernie Sanders is very, very clear. It is no surprise that a working class betrayed by the Democratic Party would betray the Democratic Party. That was, in paraphrase, what he said to explain Trump's win. The Democrat Party is no longer a credible pro-worker party. And they don't want to be. They don't have aspirations to be. That is not what their goal is at this point. So what we need is to create that pro-worker party that will appeal by its policies to Trump voters. Trump drive to cut safety net could hit his voters. Darn right it will. Those voters are upset, are angry, are disappointed, are scared because the Democratic leadership, Democratic policies, whether it was Clinton or Obama or Biden, did not respond to the terrible challenges that they face. In fact, the policies that Clinton, Obama, and Biden pursued made life worse for those voters. Now, did it hurt them as badly as Reagan did, as W did, as Trump? Maybe not. Maybe the Republicans on balance are worse. I'll accept that. But the Republicans do offer scapegoats. They offer people they can blame. The Democrats don't even do that for America's working class. Immigrants, right? The Democrats hardly, they crack down on immigrants. They hurt immigrants, but they don't use rhetoric that will maybe appeal to some working class Americans who are very upset about the fact that their wages haven't gone up. Their real wages haven't gone up in 40 or 50 years. And to be fair to Trump, some of his policies actually are good for working class voters, specifically the tariffs and also peace. Peace is better for working class voters than endless war. So that's why Democrats lose. If you want to win, you have to provide a credible, viable pro-worker alternative. I think the Green Party is the credible alternative, but they haven't proven to be viable. The Democrats are certainly viable, but they're not credible as pro-worker. So we have to figure out how we build the Green Party or an emerging party as a credible and viable alternative. /8 for health, food, and housing. That's what Trump's going to do. And this, it's kind of ironic. The New York Times goes to some Harvard guy for an analysis. It's maybe talk to working people. Do you really need to go to a Harvard professor to understand this? I mean, the irony is, of course, that working people with great reason have doubts, right? They're skeptical of Harvard. They're like, those Harvard people, they're not our friends. They're not our allies. They're not on our side. So I do find it somewhat amusing, I guess, that the New York Times would feel it has to ask Harvard teacher, they say, or Professor Elmendorf, Doug Elmendorf. But what he says is the Republican Party support is increasingly coming from people who would be hurt by standard conservative policy. And the key there is standard, right? Cut all social spending. It's very, very bad for working people. Democrats need to point this out. But more importantly, people who are credible have to point this out. People who are leading a true pro-worker renaissance are the ones who need to point this out. And they give lots of examples, and I think New York Times does a good job of this. So here are some examples of the way Trump budget cuts will likely hurt his voters, his supporters. Republicans are likely to renew their push for Medicaid. So that's health care for poor people. Medicaid work requirements, arguing that mandates help the needy find jobs. First Trump administration approved 13 state plans that would have required those who receive Medicaid to be working, like maybe they're driving an Uber, I don't know what it is, but something to get health care. And obviously that's a terrible, just cruel, just hurtful, so you have to work a low-wage job, a no-wage job, well, not no wage, but very low wage, get health care. Stupid, added, misguided. That's not going to help. And what the Times points out is that critics say, do you really need critics? Can't we just agree that the implication is that, yes, people who are subject to a work requirement, many of whom can't work, right? They have all sorts of physical and health issues. And I'm sure Republican Maga will say, oh, well, there's exceptions. There's all these exceptions. Time, energy, effort, putting those exceptions out there, getting someone to believe you when you say, well, I really can't work, or I'm trying to find work and I can't get work, or whatever. That is in itself a form of denial. So, of course, people will be denied. Arkansas dropped about 18,000 people from the rolls, from its Medicaid rolls, many of them with jobs. So Arkansas's job requirement still led to those who had jobs losing Medicaid. After the House passed a national work requirement in 2023, the CBO estimated 1.5 million people would lose federal aid, that medical coverage. It's terrible. Now, I want to make a point about this. I get why working people who have jobs, who are working their asses off, maybe 3 jobs, I get it. You look at other people and you're like, wait, why are they getting it and I'm not? Why are they getting this benefit? I'm not getting it. Or I'm getting it, I should get it because I work. They shouldn't. I have to pay for this out of my taxes. I understand that argument. There's an answer to it. The answer is everyone has health care, period. It's not a function of whether you work. It's a function of your being a human being who lives in the United States, period. End of story. That should be the response from Democrats, and it would be a very popular response. Americans are keen to what they view as an injustice. I work really, really hard to get my health care, and that person over there isn't even working and they're getting health care. But the solution is you get health care because you're a human being, not because you're working. It's not coming out of your paycheck. That would answer all these problems. The flying the ointment, of course, is Democrats don't support universal single-payer health care. They don't support Medicare for all. They don't talk about it. Even Democrats like Jamie Raskin, who pay lip service to Medicare for all, when they take power, spend their time with fruitless, counterproductive impeachment proceedings, rather than promoting a human right, health care. All right, some other areas where Trump is looking to cut, or may or may not cut. So SNAP or food stamps, He says there are sources of dependency and fraud. I'm not really aware of much fraud. Maybe, there's always a little bit of fraud in every program, but I'm sure it's totally overstated in this context versus, say, the military, where there's an extraordinary amount of fraud, regardless of who's in power, regardless of which party's administration is calling the shots. I'd rather, and I think most Americans would prefer, that everyone has enough to eat than we worry about fraud. The issue of dependency, again, I think that's real. I think a lot of Americans say, wait a second, if you give people food, then they're not going to feel they need to work, or they're not going to work. And there is an answer to that too. And the answer is an economy that generates lots and lots of jobs, lots and lots of fair paying living wage jobs. That's not what Trump's sort of about that when he talks about tariffs. But that's not enough. You got to have a higher minimum wage. You've got to make sure that labor unions are protected. The right to organize is protected. There needs to be an aggressive antitrust division, which we don't have, because when you have cartels that control the hiring process, in other words, you only have a couple, 3 employers in a particular region, they will keep wages artificially low. Wages go up when you have lots of different businesses all competing for workers. So only when you have aggressive antitrust division and labor protection can we expect good wages, fair, and greatly reduced dependency on government programs. Problem is, the Democrats haven't championed those. Lena Khan was good, right? I mean, let's be fair. There was more antitrust activity under Biden than there had been in recent years. But the Democrats lack credibility. There was also some real support for labor under Biden. He wasn't the worst in those areas. I'll give him credit for it. But they're just not good enough. The Democrats have to be consistently pro-worker. And you heard over and over, story after story, where they weren't. They're just a little bit less bad in some areas. That's not good enough. We need a true pro-worker, pro-peace alternative to both parties. And if we had that, we would win. And there's just more and more areas where, Trump is looking to cut back, or his DOGE, right, Department of Government Efficiency, Musk is looking to cut back on essential government programs. They want to have SNAP work requirements. That's just absolutely egregious. Food is also, or should certainly be, viewed as a human right. Everyone has the right to tasty, nutritious food. But again, we get to that point where people go to the supermarket and they see how expensive food is, in part because we have these cartels, supermarket cartels. You have reduced options for where you can go to buy your groceries. There aren't a lot of competing outlets sometimes in an area. Some people have to go to their CVS or the Walgreens. They live in a poor neighborhood, which doesn't have sufficient per capita income to interest a Safeway or a Giant Food or an Albertsons. So people are stuck going to a Walgreens or a Rite Aid where the prices are much higher and they have fewer options as well. So SNAP work requirements is crazy. And while most people who get SNAP do work, right? They're working poor. because wages are not sufficient. But those who aren't working and who don't have kids are mentally ill, mentally challenged, physical challenges. They're more vulnerable. They're the ones you're going to cut off. It's cruel, it's heartless, it's wrong. One other very interesting little tidbit from this article I wanted to share with you. And it's something I've talked about on my program, got criticism for taking a position that is similar to some of the Trump people. And that is limiting, the use of SNAP to certain items that, rather than all the items that are currently available, right, that you can buy. And I agree with this. I don't think sodas, and I don't know that they are, but I don't believe sodas. I believe you can buy soda with SNAP. You can buy, we had this whole Doritos discussion. I don't think those should be purchasable with SNAP. And the reason people argue with me, what about poor, people should be allowed to buy any food they want. And my answer was, Doritos ain't food. It's not healthy. It's not something that is nutritious. Coke isn't a food. I don't know what they are. They're toxins. They're poison. So that I would say we shouldn't allow. Yes, you can buy Doritos with SNAP. SNAP, they say, can be used to purchase any food. So this is from AI. I don't know how much I buy, what AI tells me, but apparently, let's see, you can't use it to buy alcohol, but you can use it. You can't buy hot foods, and you can't buy, so I guess you can't buy like a roast chicken. And I don't see why not. I mean, that's something I would say, well, maybe you should let people purchase. Is like one of those chickens, a roasted chicken or something at the supermarket, because some poor people, they don't have a kitchen. You're living in a motel or someplace like that. So you may not have a facility to prepare foods. But in terms of the snack foods, the junk foods, no, I would not allow that. I don't think they're foods. And the response from some is, well, and in fact, they even put this in the New York Times. I don't know that it would save any money, though. I don't know how banning snack junk food, right? I don't know how banning that from SNAP eligibility would reduce expenditure. It's it's got to be a de minimis amount. One of the arguments is that, well, poor people should be allowed the same options as rich people when it comes to their food. And my answer is, well, they can buy whatever they want with their own money, right? But this is taxpayer money. There's a very specific purpose to it. It's to ensure Americans have sufficient nutrients, sufficient nutrition. Because that's what we do. That's what you do for your fellow Americans. You do it for children who need to eat, just, to grow. You do it for adults who need it to survive and to be able to work and to be able to help their children out. You do it for seniors because they're seniors. That's why you have these programs. I don't see how Doritos and Coke further that mission in any way. If you want to buy that, you have, because poor people who get SNAP, they have cash. They just have a lot less. All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. The article goes on to talk about how Trump, increased the tax credit for families with children, and that helped. Back when he was president, the Democrats expanded it further by not only giving you a tax credit, but actually sending you cash if your taxes weren't sufficient. So let's say you had a $1,000 tax bill and you had a $2,000 tax credit. For Trump, that's the end of it. You don't pay any taxes, but you don't get anything back. Democrats were actually sending money to people, and that was tremendously helpful. And then it was $2,000 a month. So it was tremendously helpful. Families were getting $1,000 a month or more. They were only being taxed, their total tax bill was $1,000 a month. They would get, for one kid, another $1,000 back every month in the mail. It was really, really good. It was a great program. Republicans killed it. Democrats could have made it permanent, chose not to. Apparently, Trump is open to the idea of at least maintaining that credit. I don't know if he's going to send the money back, but that would be really positive. I wrote 8 years ago, I got almost 8 years ago, that the way for Democrats to win is to point out areas where his policies hurt his voters, where they conflict with what his voters expect, with how he campaigned. That's the way you can win. That's what Democrats can do. Now, at that time, I believe Democrats cared enough about working people that they would actually champion them if they thought that would help them win elections. Now, I think they'd prefer to lose. I spelled hawkishness wrong. Look at that. I don't know whether that was my mistake or what. There you go. So I gave a couple of examples of why Trump won, or the reasons he won, and it's similar to today. He won because Hillary was more hawkish than he was, just as Harris was more hawkish than Trump. And he won because of his more populist view on trade, and how Hillary was not a populist in any way. Those are pretty much the same reasons Trump won again. Working class voters correctly perceived Harris as a warmonger, as a hawk, as someone who was never going to do anything to reign in Israel or end our foreign entanglements. And they also did not view her as, and correctly so, as on their side when it came to economic issues, whereas Trump talked about economics. Like you saw Harris at town hall when she was asked, hey, my husband and I are in our 20s, we're living with his family. When are we going to get our own home? What can you do to help us with the cost of affordable housing? And her response, I love small business owners. I mean, what the hell, what kind of crap is that? So what progressives need to do is point out the failings of Trump when it comes to working people. But we need to give a credible, viable alternative. I have been critical of people who I view as making apologies for the Democratic Party, excusing, saying, well, the Democrats did the best they could and working people just don't get it and they're stupid and they're this and they're that. And how come they don't realize that Democrats cut the cost of insulin? Why don't they get credit for it? And it's because it's not enough. Because none of that has changed our trajectory towards more and more wealth concentration, towards more and more power and influence in the hands of so few people. That's what we need to credibly and viably fight against. And Democrats don't do that. Haven't done it, aren't credible, aren't viable. Well, they're viable, they're not credible. I saw this posted by a Facebook friend who I actually consider a real friend, but has very, very different politics than I do. And their politics are different because they're work for the Democratic Party, as I understand it. Their comment was spot on in this case. They quoted Bernie Sanders for criticizing Trump policies and for pointing out how those self-same policies have hurt Trump voters. That's what we need to do. But where I went beyond this post and commented on it, I thanked them for the post. I agreed with it. And then I said, the problem is Democrats can't claim the mantle persuasively, credibly, as a party of working class voters. And that's why they lose election. All right, I want to get to one more topic. We have a little bit of time. Let's do it. I've been kind of hashing this, billboarding it for a while. I am interested in the gender talk, the sex talk, the trans stuff. I always find that very interesting. Maybe it's just humanity. I don't know. But I also think it's interesting because I think that focus by some Democrats has been counterproductive. But I acknowledge, and especially where the argument is that trans girls and women should be allowed to compete in sporting events with bio girls and females. I think that's a problematic argument. And I think the claim that, it only affects a few people really isn't true. There are many families, many poor, struggling, working class families where they have a daughter who is really athletic, and they're hoping that they can parlay her talent into a scholarship or perhaps even into a professional career in athletics. Doesn't have to mean you're in the WNBA. It could mean you're a coach. Could mean you work for a high school swim team. Something of that nature. There are a lot of different ways to look at that. But when you have trans girls competing against bio girls, you are reducing the opportunities for those girls. And that does have a real effect, a real implication. Now, I'm not saying that the trans athletes shouldn't have opportunities. They should. Everyone should have an opportunity. But I specifically see the cost to some bio girls and their families when you open up female sports athletics to trans girls. So this was posted. I wanted to get to this. So this was posted in our Facebook group, right? Which, by the way, subscribe now. And let me see, I don't know if I have my Facebook GIF. Let me put my Facebook GIF up there because that's where this is. And if you want more from the GIF, Facebook GIFs and the like, then definitely subscribe to Halitics. I thought this was I'm not seeing it in my text, which is weird. I guess that isn't text. I thought it was. It must be some other. Maybe it's image. Yeah, there it is. Facebook GIF. So that's Trump, right? And you can sort of recognize it. And it's sort of like to mock him because he's been so against trans rights, right? He's gone after trans people. So it's like, well, what about you? If you're not, if you're so against, if you believe there's only two genders, right? Because he said there's only two, there's only male and female. Then who are you? Who's this? What doesn't this prove there's more than two genders? And my response was, there are definitely, or genders are on a spectrum, right? Some people are extremely masculine. You would associate them. They probably associate themselves as male. Some people are very feminine. They probably associate themselves as female, or girls, women, men, boys on the far end. And then there's, as you move towards the center, and I think what you'd say is there's two humps, right? Males, in general, bio males, you have a bell curve. And in the middle of that bell curve are what you would consider to be boyish qualities, but with some, feminine traits as well. And then far to the right, just super uber masculine, maybe mesomorphic, body type, maybe not, aggressive, doesn't cry, doesn't show much emotion, doesn't have much emotion, maybe isn't particularly maternal. And then on the left side of that particular bell curve for males, you'd have more feminine traits, right? Someone who loves to be with children, maybe like a male who becomes an elementary school teacher or wants to be a flight attendant, something of that sort. Now, I'm not putting that down. I'm not trying to cast aspersions or be pejorative. I'm just saying that in terms of how people associate themselves by gender, I think it is clearly a spectrum, right? For males and females, and the same thing for females. You right in the middle, you tend to be a woman who has female predominant traits or qualities, what we would associate, maybe more nurturing, less aggressive, and then far to the right, closer to male traits, more focused on athletic, more aggressive, and far to the left, the opposite of that. So genders, yes, genders on a spectrum was my view. And I said, but sex isn't. You're male, you're female. You're XY. You have that Y chromosome, you're a male. You're XX, you're a female. Well, that position was challenged. And I really decided to go look into it because I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I missed something. My basic view had always been, well, it's the, and that's not just a view, it's based on my research, reading, learning over time, that Y chromosome makes all the difference. Even when you have DSDs, developmental sex differences, if you have a Y, even if you have like 3 X's and a Y, you're still considered a male. And one of the big reasons for that is that if you have a Y, I understood if you've got a Y chromosome in your makeup, then you can't produce eggs that are viable, that can be fertilized. I got this response from Shade. I usually black out the names of people, but he's an all-star contributor, and I know he takes pride in his contributions, and I wanted to share them, especially where he really, really made me think and reconsider my views. So very fairly, Shade writes, you won't find absolute universal agreement on this, specifically that sex is not on a spectrum. While sex has historically been viewed as binary, the existence of sex chromosome anomalies suggests that biological sex also exhibits complexity. Well, we'll get specifically into that. Why did I take issue with that view? Well, the position expressed in this article formed the basis of my opinion that sex is largely binary, or is binary. It's not a spectrum. It's not like gender, where different traits are associated with different sexes, and they're like on a spectrum, right? Just like it could be 5'10" or 5'9" or 5'9 and a half or 5'9 and a quarter, 5'9 and 3/4. That's a spectrum. 2 poles is not a spectrum. And this article, when I read this, I thought, this is March 23rd, but I was doing my research after the discussion online, when I found this article, which seemed to me very, very responsibly written by somebody who would know what they're talking about. This kind of confirmed my views. Can a person with a Y chromosome give birth to a child? And I looked through it very closely, and here's what they said. Here's what the author said, and we'll see her in a second. And I viewed this article, by the way, as trying to be very fair, seeing both sides of it. It wasn't like some kind of right-wing view whatsoever. So what they said was, here's the bottom line. Pregnancy requires a uterus. Males and most XY females. So XY females, and that phrase right there made me think, okay, this is somebody who's definitely sympathetic to the trans community, who's definitely looking to support trans views. And I mean, I think a lot of people would say, well, in fact, as I understood it, the view has been, you can't be an XY female because the Y makes you male. You could be an XY girl or woman, but as a female, meaning your sex is defined as female, that can't be the case. And what they wrote is, so I was like, okay, they're sympathetic to the trans community. And she even says some XY females have a uterus and they can become pregnant. As you see that what I highlighted, a very few XY females, and I take the position XY means male. Some can have a uterus and they can become pregnant with a donated egg. And that's what I put in highlight. So in other words, they're not females because their eggs, they don't have eggs. It's only a donated egg. They don't have viable eggs. So again, they're males who, because of DSD, developmental sex differences, have a uterus. But they're not really biological males. And here's the author, Karen Colbert. She was at very, very impressive. So when I saw this, I really wanted to have somebody who I thought was a credible source. So, or Karen, did I say Catherine? Karen. She's at Stanford, getting a PhD there, structural biology. I mean, that's like way above my pay grade. So I was like, okay, well, that kind of ends it, right? If you're XY, if you've got a Y, you don't have viable eggs, you don't have fertilizable eggs, therefore, you're not a female because of that Y. Now, some would say, well, but not all XXs can have babies either. Not all XXs have viable eggs either. And then the answer would be, well, that might be because they have a different developmental sex difference. But the Y itself determines, or is a guarantee, right? The Y itself is a guarantee. You can't you don't emit fertilizable eggs. You don't have ovaries that can generate eggs, period. That was my view. And that article confirmed it. But never say never. I continued to do research. And I came across this article, Perspectives in Pediatric Pathology, ovotesticular DSD, and they call it true hermaphroditism. This article is dated 2024, August 8. The term hermaphroditism, which is kind of like your sort of a mix of male, female, has really gone out of style. It's not used anymore. This article is a little over 10 years old. So basically it's considered ovotesticular DSD, and some use the term disorder of sexual development, but that is also deprecated. So it's, I say, developmental sex difference, right? Developmental sex difference. These are people, they say ovotesticular. So there's testicles. There is male development, but is there X? Is there X? Or is there Y rather? Yes, there's X. Is there also Y? And can such individuals with that male chromosome, that Y chromosome, give birth? And apparently there are a tiny number of individuals who have an Y chromosome who have become pregnant with their own ova. So these are people where they have both testicular and ovarian parenchyma. I don't know what that means. And the same, it's very, very rare. 1 in 100,000 live births. And of those people, they've identified maybe 11 have had children, have actually been able to give birth. So they, in that same article, or in a different article actually, fertility was found. And again, we don't use that term hermaphrodite. It would be ovotesticular individual. They're mosaic. They're part, it's really interesting. Such people are part male, part female. They're not a blend, really. It's like half of their body is male and half is female. And of such a person, in this person, she was confirmed, we'll say she's the mother. She gave birth, she delivered the child, and the child was born of her egg and of the father's sperm. So, my definite assertion that the Y chromosome rules out the ability to generate or produce a viable fertilizable ovum is false. There are a tiny number of exceptions to that rule. If you want to say that's enough to make it a spectrum, I would argue it isn't. But there's more. There are some mosaic individuals who are mostly male, and there are some mosaic individuals who are mostly female. And now they're very rare, they're few, but presumably, or according to studies now, according to biology, we all may have some cells in our bodies that aren't consistent with our sex, with what we consider to be our sex. So I might have some XX cells. Instead of every one of my cells being XY, there may be some that are XX. It's really fascinating. And what this article, let me see if I can see it, Sex Redefined from Scientific American. The idea of two sexes is overly simplistic. Biologists now think there is a larger spectrum than just binary female and male. And it seems like there is, what these articles say. So I accept that, but just a few more points I want to make. And then we'll call it a day and call it a week, and we'll be back on Monday. By the way, Monday will not be an Orlin Monday. We'll have an Orlin Tuesday next week. So does this mean really that there's no such thing as sex, right? You can't really distinguish. There's male, I guess some people are much more masculine, others are more feminine. But even sex itself, it's the whole idea of a male and a female is somewhat an antiquated one, because we contain within our own bodies often XX and XY cells. Well, I would say no. I would say, fine, if you want to say it's a spectrum, fine. But in the end, the great majority of us are either male or female. Either we are able to create a fertilizable egg and we're mostly XY and we can't. Or we are mostly XX until, between menses and, when you lose, what is it when you, older women, they're no longer menstruate. I forget the term now, but or you can't, right? I mean, but they're still women. They could at one point. So I think that is not really a spectrum. But I'm willing to, accept the argument, the flip side. But it's so interesting because it's also true what the scientists say, that there's more sex differences. Yes, within your own body, you might have some female parts and some male parts, but the actual differences between female and male are even greater. It's kind of surprising how big an effect of sex chromosomes we've been able to see. In other words, how they impact on your size, on your body type, on your physical abilities, on your strength, your speed. They're saying it's greater than we thought. So it's not a nurture thing. It's not like, oh, well, because you're perceived to be a male, you're more interested in sports. And you're more athletic. It's not the case. It's actually the cells themselves, according to this article, that create those very, very significant differences. But they also point out, within people who are considered to be male, there's maybe some female, and within people who are considered to be female, there may be some male cells. And this makes it tough, according to Arthur Arnold, the University of California, UCLA. How do we divide? How do we draw the line between the two? And I would argue most of the time we don't need to. Well, as a society, we don't need to. You want to date somebody, date them. You find them appealing, attractive, go out with them. Now, if you want to have a child with them, that becomes an issue for those people. But why does society have such a big interest in deciding whether you're male or female? Most of the time, I think we don't. But because there are sex differences, right? Because as we just saw, those chromosomes create real, meaningful differences between men and women. We need to create a society then where those differences don't determine your outcome. In other words, if women want to stay, in general, are more inclined to be nurturing and take care of children than men, fine. But they still get enough to live. They still have enough. They still have enough. Still create a society where everyone has enough, whatever their life choices are. Raise children, become a CEO, become a professional athlete. It doesn't matter. You're always going to have enough. And even if you start an Amazon, which I'm not saying a woman couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't do it, but if you look at the drive that Jeff Bezos had to be a dominant in the world of business, to be in complete control, I would say that's pretty masculine type behavior. So fine. You can live a little better than everyone else. Maybe some men will make a little more than some women on average. But the women will still have enough, and the men still won't have too much. That's how you create a world where it doesn't really matter, where you don't need to draw the line. But you still will need to draw the line a little bit because, at least in my opinion, you can't have sports teams that males compete against females. There just are too great a difference. There's just too obvious advantages that men have over women in most sports. So you do have to engage on occasion in line drawing. Generally, I don't think it's very hard to draw that line. Most chromosomal tests, if you have to go that far, will show you whether someone's XY or XX. And I think most of the time you just go by, again, the birth certificate. Doctors look and say penis, they see a vagina, and they decide, fine, let's go. Now, there might be some examples, like there's a Moroccan boxer, Amani Khalif, who was, whose sexuality as a woman was questioned, and it seems like they had a legitimate question about her sexuality, whether her sex. So every now and then, maybe you do need to do a little bit more effort in a competitive sports that are in professional or very high level competition, because we don't want people getting hurt, because we want to have a relatively level playing field. We can't completely ignore or avoid the question of sex. What's determined sex? Who's what sex? But yeah, okay, it's much more of a spectrum than I thought. And in the end, I believe that confirms my view, which is we need a world where everyone has enough and no one has too much. That'll do it for me. You all have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.